As someone who's made a living trying to determine cost effectiveness, Romney can't be happy with his performance. But looking at the big picture of the Republican race, the Michigan primary highlights an interesting possible scenario on the horizon. What happens if Romney and Santorum keep splitting delegates like this? Ron Paul keeps grabbing a few, his share too, and no one in the race ends up with the number of delegates needed to secure the nomination. Could it be that another Bush ends up in the White House? Before your head explodes, let's turn it over to Russ Baker, investigative journalist and author of the book Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, and editor of the website WhoWhatWhy.com, which currently has a piece up explaining how a Bush might win the White House this year. Russ, welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
Great to have you with us. Given how this race has played out, just how likely is a brokered convention, and why Jeb Bush coming out of that?
Well, I don't know how likely it is. I mean, there's certainly a possibility. The way that Romney is going, he may very well not have a majority, and then you'd have a situation like you did with Wendell Willkie. Now, in that case, with all of the candidates wounded from what you can describe as a kind of a circular firing squad, you might have to bring someone else in. And the governor of Maine, a Tea Party favorite, was quoted the other day as saying that he supports that. He thinks there might be a dark horse in the offing. And the point that we make on this new article on WhoWhatWhy.com is that it may actually be Jeb Bush. Now, people might say, oh, now, come on, that couldn't be. But the fact of the matter is, Jeb Bush is very, very well positioned. He's made himself out to be a kind of an elder statesman for the party. He's criticized the candidates for their attacks on each other, and he's tried to make himself more appealing on a kind of a general basis. That's the sort of thing that works at a convention. That's the sort of thing that works for a Republican kingmakers who are concerned about having a viable candidate in the general election. So I think that's something we have to look at. I'm also deeply interested in meetings that have been taking place between the Bush family and Barack Obama that have not been properly covered. The old man, George H.W. Bush, and Jeb had a private meeting with Obama when he first went in office. They had another one recently, and I'm deeply intrigued as to what kind of conversations they are having.
Yeah, I think you may be onto something here. Last week in Dallas, Jeb Bush said, I used to be a conservative. And I watch these debates and I'm wondering, it's a little troubling when people try to appeal to people's fears. That was what he said to a group in Dallas just a week ago. Was that his setup for the general election? I mean, that's not the kind of language you could use if you had to go through the hoops of the primaries, which, where it's all right-wing wackadoodles. But for the general election, that sounds like the kind of talk that really would work. And as a follow-up, if Jeb Bush is no longer a conservative, what is he?
Yeah, he amended that later, Tom, and he said, I still am a conservative, but I think he did that deliberately. He's trying to go for a general election appeal, and I think the Bush family game plan and the game plan of the people who back them, and as you know, in my book, Family of Secrets, I'm very interested in the sort of unknown history of the people who back this family and why they back them, and the long-term efforts they have to maintain power. I think what's going on here is they've got a two-part play. One is it's Jeb against Obama, and if that doesn't work out, which it may not, then it's 2016, and people are tired of the Democrats now. Obama's served out his term, and it swings back to the Republicans, and then Jeb is supremely well positioned.
Yeah, particularly if he takes a run first, because it seems like one of the Republicans' typical things is, whoever was unsuccessful in the last primary wins the next one. I mean, whether it's Reagan or, this has been repeated over and over again. Rick Santorum was asking for Democrats to vote for him in Michigan. Coming from a progressive perspective, I was on the air advising Democrats not to do that, not to mess with the Republican primary in Michigan, not to do the whole Operation Chaos kind of thing, because Romney is pretty badly damaged goods, and it seems to me that Romney would be much easier to beat than Jeb Bush or Chris Christie or Marco Rubio if they came out in August, September, with just a few months to it's not really enough time to drive up their negatives the way Romney's negatives are already so high. Does this make political sense to you?
Well, it makes political sense historically, because we have to remember that Michigan has had a very strong kind of a conservative blue-collar strain in the state. George Wallace did quite well there in 1972, and I know that's many years ago, but I think that element is still there, and I think that's what Santorum was appealing to. But of course, a lot of Democrats want to vote for him because they're betting that ultimately he's more of a loose cannon than Romney, and thus, while you're right, in some ways he's stronger, he also faces some bigger risks in the general election.
My take on that was that the wise elders of the Republican Party would simply never let Rick Santorum be the candidate, that there's no possibility that he'd be the candidate, and that if he continues to move along on this thing, he raises the probabilities, and particularly if Democrats help him, it raises the probabilities of a brokered convention, out of which could come a Bush-Christie ticket, for example, which I think would be a real challenge for the Obama ticket.
That's very, very true, and in fact, Bush has been positioning himself on a whole bunch of things. He's on the board of the Project for a New American Century. You may remember them,
PNAC,
the ones PNAC, who some people think predicted the 9/11 attacks, and he's deeply involved with a whole bunch of companies. His latest venture is he's merged his outfit with one that does privatized disaster relief. So he's cashing in across the board on the privatization of government that his brother expanded on so much, and really has got himself tight with the kind of the 1% of the 1% that really does run the Republican Party. As I point out in our article, that is not the Gingrich people, and that is not the Santorum people.
Right. In the minute we have left here, Russ, the way that Jeb Bush portrays himself, kind of an average nice guy, married to a Hispanic woman, nice family, speaks Spanish fluently, multicultural, friendly, that's not the Bush family. That's not Jeb Bush, you say.
You know, Tom, they've been so brilliant at selling that image, and the 5 years that I spent researching them just staggered me that there could be so much dirty stuff that had never come out about this family. And Jeb really is cut from the same cloth. We see it with his very close relationships with people in Florida, some of whom were convicted of terrorist acts, his involvement in getting them very short prison sentences, or getting them pardoned or exonerated, and doing business with many questionable figures, accruing a great amount of wealth himself under questionable circumstances. So if he does run, I think suddenly people are going to find that he's a much more interesting character than they realized. Yeah,
unless there's not enough time for all the news to get out there. Russ Baker, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Still a bit too early to tell if a brokered convention with smoke-filled rooms is on the horizon, but frankly, I'd be shocked if Republican Party officials don't have Jeb Bush on speed dial. Coming up after